Okay, welcome back to another supersized episode of Dr. Schwartz and Mr. Power. This episode was so big we had to cut it in two. I'm your host, Mr. Alex Power. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host, a man of previously Brobdingnailian proportions, Dr. Alex Schwartz. What's up? How's it going?
It's going good. I'm feeling average sized.
Yes, no, you are not quite Lilliputian nor Brobdingnailian, but just right, like the Goldilocks of sizes. I don't know what that means.
Don't know
Okay,
either.
so today we'll be talking about the fat fit paradox, as well as some misconceptions and advice around lifters and athletes with overweight and obesity, including but not limited to super heavyweight competitors in various sports. So the fit fat paradox, just for the record, not our language. That's how it appears in the literature, in the research. So, I know we're not calling people fat. So we'll be discussing whether or not you need to be lean to be fit. We'll also ask about whether you need to rethink common approaches to very large athletes, or rather, if the collective we, if everyone, the fitness, sports, coaching, and academic community writ large, such as linemen in American football, throwers in track and field, and super heavyweights in sports like powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. So yeah, maybe to lead us in, Schwartz, if you want to take a bit of a crack at this.
In terms of body positivity, I think we need to talk about that first. Um, Body positivity is something that finds its way into the discussion, and we know why. Whenever you talk about weight loss or body composition, there's someone who brings in at least a hint of value judgment. Often people do this without even realizing it. Now, we're not making value statements about people with overweight and obesity, especially when it comes to how people look. We're only here to talk about the health and performance impacts of overweight and obesity. So let's start with the fit fat paradigm paradox. And again, as Alex said, this isn't our language. It's what it's called in the research. So simply people with overweight or obesity who engage in regular exercise regimens have lower risk factors that are typically associated with obesity. It's not really a paradox though, rather it's just an example of not comparing likes and likes. And all it really demonstrates is that exercise has a strong effect on health, and it's not that body fat is health agnostic. Now, we see this over and over when people undertake lifestyle changes, factors associated with improved health, improve blood sugar management before changes in body weight or composition. This one of the things that we see immediately is especially particularly with people with type 2 diabetes. Their blood glucose regulation improves before they really see any changes in weight. Unfortunately, this doesn't remove all of the long-term risks that are associated with overweight and obesity, cancer, fatty liver disease, osteoarthritis. So instead, it's important to just think about it as a state in between being overweight and fit and being lean and fit. It's better than the former, but it's worse than the latter. So the fit fat paradox or the fat fit paradox or paradigm isn't exactly an argument for staying overweight. Rather, it's just a demonstration of the powerful effects of exercise, regardless of body composition. Even if you're not making headways on body composition, there's still measurable benefits to engage in exercise.
Yeah, no, I think we can all think of people we've known who've fallen into this, especially younger people who are still active, are carrying more body fat than would necessarily be ideal from a long term health perspective. But they're legit in good shape. They're athletic, coordinated. They have good endurance. They can do a lot. Um, and I think this is one of the interesting or important things to identify is that doesn't mean they get a free pass on all the potential health downsides of being, having overweight or obesity. But it's still better than, being inactive and in that state, right? So, yeah. To talk about this, we're going to sort of split this in two sort of groups or sort of two narratives, and one's around athletes and one's around non athletes. Um, and mostly the centers around sort of messaging and what people hear. So some athletes, and Alex, you should be able to speak to this a little bit later because I know this, parallels your own experience, especially in American football, powerlifting, and weightlifting, and some other weight divisions, sports, or as previously mentioned, throwing events. There's this idea that more mass is better, right? That so long as you're getting bigger and stronger, your performance will improve. And this, additional or excess adiposity is just the price you pay for that. But it's worth it because ultimately performance will be higher. Um, I've heard this taken some pretty weird extremes over the years. I think probably the strangest one, it always stands out to me, is the argument that having, significant belly fat, so this visceral fat around the waist, particularly, under the abdominal wall, often referred to as heart attack fat, um, helps performance in exercises like the squat because it increases intra-abdominal pressure, thus improving strength in exercises like squats. Like, honestly, even if this were true, and I don't know, but I have serious doubts, this reflects some pretty hard, you know, these are priorities I can't align myself with as a coach and just someone concerned with other people's well-being. Have you ever heard that one or?
Yeah, I've heard a few wonky things. I feel sometimes when I hear these things, and particularly with my experience with football, it just sort of harkens back to how sumo wrestlers train and how they become sumo wrestlers, and that just it's been prevalent forever because sumo is such an ancient sport.
Yeah, no, that's
But
actually a good
yeah,
example. I know they have these really, like, yeah, I don't know, bananas. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't think there's a lot of bananas, but like a
a lot
bananas
of rice.
regime, right? Like it's
Yeah,
just, yes, a lot of rice, just a lot of eating, eat, 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 really rich foods all the time. Yeah, I don't know.
they are getting more jacked though, which is funny. I have a friend who's super into
Yeah, well, I mean,
sumo,
again, because
and yeah,
I actually saw a short, like 20-minute documentary on Netflix a couple years ago about women in sumo that I watched with my daughter. That was sort of interesting. Anyway, this sort of, I don't know if they still carry it, but it was cool because of course it's traditionally a men's endeavor, and it's tied up in with I think Shintoism as well. So it's really hard to sort of break how people engage in it because there is that religious component built into the actual sumo competitions. All right,
yeah.
so yeah,
So
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I derailed us with sumo, which is always fascinating to me.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
but
yeah, sumo's cool.
so yeah, it is. On the other hand, we do hear about different messaging for active people with overweight and obesity versus what you talked about with athletes. Um, Essentially, this is some blend of the fit fat paradox with some body positivity sprinkled in. For us, the body positivity piece has no real place here. Like I said at the start, we're not making claims about how people should look. We're only interested in health and performance. As for the fit fat paradox, you sometimes hear people claim that since exercise can have significant impact on health, there's no need to address body composition per se. This is unfortunately not really what the data shows, and this does extend the logic too far.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, obviously, I agree. This is pretty easy to agree with, and it's just I think throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like it's better to be fit and obese, like to be engaged in exercise, but it's not a get out of jail free card from the health perspective. Like you should absolutely be have an active lifestyle regardless of your body composition. No, I'd like if it did, but it doesn't get you out of everything, unfortunately. So yeah, so back to the messaging around athletes, and I think you're a really good person to speak to this. And this is again sort of that bigger is better narrative that you do come across, and is still out there, not just in super heavyweight athletes. It's a something you hear a lot in all sorts of strength events. So, for those who don't know, I know we've mentioned it on the show in the past, and maybe this is some people's first episode, but you played university football as a lineman, and when I met you, when we were both much younger, you were over 300 pounds, so like something nearly 150 kilos. Like you're a big kid. So, so what were you told? I guess I think is an interesting place to start.
Um, so it varied with the coaches that I had. I would say that really for the most part, just the general culture of the sport was that in order to be a lineman, you had to be bigger. Like you needed to be bigger at all costs. And the position I played lineman, it was encouraged to be bigger all the time. It was basically the same attitude as sumo, with the idea that someone who's, let's say, 300 pounds is just going to be harder to push than someone who's lighter. But the flip side is, and the part that nobody ever talks about, and you had actually mentioned this to me in university too, was that someone who's 250 pounds and lean, like 12% body fat, is absolutely jacked and strong. And they'd probably do just fine and be a lot faster and not have to worry about carrying a bunch of superfluous weight. It's just really hard to find people like that, and it's really hard to get that way. So there are those issues, and you're effectively like a large moving piece, and so you have people on the front lines who are hitting each other that big. Now, the in terms of like my experiences with it, it's pretty funny. I remember having a discussion with a lineman who I was teammates with going into the combine that they had for the pro football here in Canada. Um, and I remember talking with him because I remember prior to one training camp, I lost like 15 pounds and, I moved to the guard position instead of center. So I no longer had to snap a ball. And now I'm also 15, 20 pounds lighter. And so I was actually outperforming everybody in that camp because I was able to jump out really quickly, get to where I needed to get to and push people around at like 275, 280 pounds. And I remember discussing with him and just going, he's like, I got to impress the scouts. I need to impress them. And he's already like 330 pounds at this point and not a great 330 pounds. Like it was a worse 300 some odd pounds than I was, not to like, you know, be one of those. But
Does that count as fat
and
shaming? I don't know. Like, is that my fat was better
it's
than yours?
fat on fat crime. So basically
Yeah.
he we were having a discussion and I said, "Look, like, you know, you need to like go in there and probably just be faster, particularly with the Canadian sport, which is funny because it really lends itself to faster game because the field's bigger. So speed does have a dramatic impact on the game. And so if you're faster, I think it would show better. And he was convinced, no, I gotta be I gotta be like bigger, I gotta be big, but one of the biggest guys there. Anyways, out of all the linemen there, him and one other guy were the only two guys that were over 300 pounds. And they were like well over 300 pounds. And they also both happen to have the slowest times for all of the running and agility drills. Shocker. Needless to say, another one of them got drafted or picked up. But it
Yeah, and I
goes to
think
show you that
you touch on a really good.
yeah, it just goes to show you that it's so ingrained in us, and I remember losing all the weight after I stopped playing, and players coming up to me, like former teammates going, rather than saying, "Hey, wow, you look great. You've lost a lot of weight." It's like, "Oh, you got tiny, you got small." And it's just this thing where I have to get past this barrier of feeling so shame. And I was still like 220. Like I lost 100 pounds, but I was still 220 pounds. Like I'm not small, but oh, you're tiny, you're small. And it's just like it was this mental thing I had to deal with.
That's funny, and I think you touched on it. But another aspect of being really heavy that often isn't considered, like you said, like it might be harder to move you, but like for others to move you, but it's harder for you to move you as well, right? Like that weight doesn't only apply to other people trying to move you. You have to
Gravity
accelerate
is an
that weight too, and
equalizer.
unless
Yeah,
the
yeah.
position really is, yeah, unless the position is just stand there, and I never played football, but I don't believe that is the case. It's it cuts both ways. But anyway, yeah, and then yeah, you weren't. I mean, you weren't a small 220. Like you were. I think you were. I mean, you're significantly more muscular at 220 than you were at 300, frankly. Um, but anyway, yeah, it's interesting. So that's there, and you see this too. I see it a bit to a lesser extent, like even in Olympic weightlifting, where you have weight divisions, and people want to fill out their weight division, so be at the top of their weight division no matter what. And if you're trying to go from 85 to 95 kilos, but the last 5 6 kilos is isn't muscle, it's not going to help. Like it's not, you're just not automatically stronger and better because you're heavier. And again, it just speaks to a misunderstanding of what it means to fill out a weight division and why you might want to do that. Um, so yeah, I mean, so the question comes down to, I think, is more mass always better? And for those who, I'm going to speak a little bit to how this applies in a sporting context, but for those who are just interested in the health context, we'll get to that right after. So, but first, yeah. So is more mass, is just being a bigger athlete, whether it's super heavyweight or a lineman, always better? And
So
so
I sorry to
it's worth,
interrupt, but I
yeah, go.
hear this. You kind of touched on this idea of this thing that I've heard over and over again, particularly with throws. I've heard this with the Highland Games throws, which was really funny because of my experience going into that as a thrower rather than as a powerlifter or strongman, who were a lot of the guys coming in. But it was this idea is like, well, mass moves mass. And so, but then you have track athletes who go in and throw, um, who are much lighter than a lot of the bigger throwers, like the powerlifters and strongmen. They're always there's like a joking point of contention because they'll come in there and the curve's very different. It's just throwing stuff, so they've been doing it most of their careers. And so I remember going in when we were doing like all the amateur stuff, and guys were getting frustrated because they're like powerlifters and strongmen have been doing it for a couple of years, and I'm like, oh, I'm just throwing crap, and and I show up and I'm like 30, 40, 50 pounds lighter than all of these guys at least, and throwing as far if not farther than them on some of the events.
Yeah, no, and that doesn't shock the hell out of me. Like it's not surprising. And I mean, I think, that mass moves mass, mass is stronger, or what we'll get to a little bit later, this idea of, like the absolute load is higher on, you know, Olympic weightlifters or powerlifters as a justification for different training loads. It's like a lot of these events are just an exhibition in poorly or half understood physics principles. Mass
Mhm.
doesn't move mass. I mean, I guess if you had, two colliding objects and you have to conserve momentum, the smaller one's going to move. But that's not what anyone's talking about, right? Like we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and that's fair. And I mean, not everyone took physics or biomechanics, and nor should they. But that doesn't mean you should throw around ideas like mass is mass and think that we're not going to come at them. So all right. So is more mass always better? I think so. There's some things we want to cover first. So whenever you're gaining weight, even just fat, even if you're not training at all, there's always some amount of associated increase in, pretty much always, except in some pathological conditions, or pathologies. You're always going to gain some lean mass as well, right? And this is normal. And so lean mass often gets conflated with muscle mass. And anyone who regularly listens to different podcasts on the topic, I'm sure they've heard this, but I like to treat people like they're smart but don't know anything so that we can get them up to speed. And so lean mass is just non-fat mass, and it includes skin, it includes organ weight, it includes extra water you're holding because you have a really high salt diet, it includes all the poop in your intestines, like everything, right? And so this goes up when you gain weight, basically always. And a lot of it is, some of it is muscle, some of it's like tendon, a lot of it's actually organ weight. So, as you gain weight, you eat more, which usually these things are, are pretty closely linked. Your intestines get bigger, your liver gets bigger. This is all normal and it happens. None of that's contributing to, power output. So the idea is, in the instance of someone who's, lifting or, strength athlete, the idea is though, at least some of this is going to be lean mass, right? And that lean mass or muscle mass, sorry, and that muscle mass is going to be over and above what you would have if you were leaner, right? So the idea being, okay, if I just keep gaining weight, I'm going to be able to gain more muscle than had I stayed leaner. And it's actually surprisingly unclear. And I don't think that, like from the research, and I don't think that when you start making other considerations, that the evidence really points in that direction. First, anecdotally, I would point to, famous athletes in history. So super heavyweight Olympic weightlifter Anatoly Pizarenko from the early 80s. Super heavyweight
Man.
lifter, one of the best of all
Yeah.
time. And like you could kind of see his abs. Like
Yeah,
he
he was
was
a
lean.
freak.
Dude was beefcake.
Yep, yep.
And but he didn't seem to be suffering at all from from not being essentially obese, which a lot of these super heavyweight Olympic weightlifters and powerlifters are obese. Like this is not like, I'm not mincing words here. They're carrying a lot of body fat, and that's just how it is, and it's often deliberate. So then, is this another interesting question, or another interesting topic that I think we should cover? Is this muscle that they gain the same as muscle you have when you're lean, sort of like fat muscle versus lean muscle? Like if you're staying lean and getting muscular versus if you're honestly kind of out of shape. And it doesn't actually seem to be the case. So first off, the muscles are bigger, but there's often an intrusion of non-contractile elements. And so what that means in normal people speak is that as you're getting sort of into overweight and obesity zone, even as someone who's regular training with weights, someone who's, doing a sport as an athlete, you get, you know, easy way to I picture it as marbling. Like when you buy a, piece of red meat, and there's, fat that's inside the muscle tissue itself. And that happens with people as well. And you do see this as people get into overweight and obesity, even when they're athletic. None of that is helping with your, your athletic goals. And as we'll speak to in a sec, it might actually be directly pulling away from it, not just because it's dead weight. The other issue is, and we're going to get into this in more depth in the second part of this, because it's going to be a two-part podcast, like a second episode. We're going to talk a little bit about muscle fiber types. So I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with the idea that you have these fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. Fast twitch muscle fibers contract more quickly and more forcefully. Mostly it's more quickly though. Slow twitch muscle fibers contract more slowly, just exactly how it sounds. In humans, there's two types of fast twitch fibers. There's type A and there's type X. The X ones are kind of weird. So the type X muscle fibers actually contract faster than the type A. And so when you hear that, you think, okay, so I'm going to want lots of these type X muscle fibers because they're going to make me more powerful. The funny thing is that they're actually also very fragile. And so when you exercise, they're more prone to tearing and rupture, like the individual fibers, not whole muscle
Mhm.
body tearing. Um, and so they're really easy to damage, and they've got this like fragile quality to them. And in pretty much everyone who exercises regularly, particularly strength training, you almost don't see these fibers, right? All the fibers convert to type 2A, so fast twitch A fibers. So the only time you see significant numbers of these, or when you typically see significant numbers of these, is in people who are untrained, right? So people who have very low activity levels or sedentary, people who've had immobilized limbs. So if you break your arm, they put a cast on. It's on there for a few weeks. They take it off, and you'll find that some of the fast twitch muscle fibers had converted to this like fast X muscle fibers. Strange stuff. Or people who've had who have paralyzed limbs. You'll see a high number or high proportion of these fast X fibers. And so you might ask yourself, like, why is that? And what are these fibers for if you seem to lose them as soon as you get active and they're fragile? And the answer is like, we don't know. It's sort of a weird, like if you go through literature, everyone's kind of scratching their head over this still. Like the scientists who research this, it's weird. Like, I don't know. And I'm actually, it's a weird thing. So finally, another group that you see this in is, athletes with obesity. So you do see these in, like Olympic weightlifters and super heavyweight divisions. Similarly, they've looked at powerlifters and you see the same thing. And I think this actually goes towards an explanation for something that, a simpler explanation for something that's often observed in these sports. And that's that, you often hear like anecdotes from coaches or athletes that, these super heavyweight athletes can't tolerate the same workloads as, their lower weight division or lighter counterparts. So, on previous episodes, if you go back to our, muscle hypertrophy a solved problem episode, I don't remember the number. We talk about volume load. So, volume load, if you base that off what people's maximum lifts are, typically super heavyweight lifters aren't able to tolerate the same amount of volume load. And people will invent these, frankly, kind of cockamamie explanations for this. Like, and I've heard again, smart people who should know better talk about how, well, the absolute load is higher and that's probably why they can't do it. But that's not really how your
Mhm.
body works. That's not how, tissue mechanics works. Muscle, the strength of muscle scales pretty linearly. With size, so does, tendon strength, joint strength. There's no indication that as the absolute load gets higher beyond some threshold, that things work less efficiently. What you
Yeah.
do see, though, with in obese people, including athletes or people with obesity, including athletes, is that as you get this increase in total body fat and you get this intrusion of things like fatty tissue into the muscle, you get a lower capillary density in the muscle. So, which amounts to essentially poorer blood flow into the muscle, and you get more of these type X muscle fibers, right? So, my contention is that they're just not in very good shape. Like the super heavyweights who are, struggling with volume load, they're not in good shape. It's not that there's this, weird like explanation that needs kind of like twisting of understandings of our, mechanistic effects of like, the mechanics of muscle or tissue that it doesn't actually follow how these tissues behave. So it's actually just wrong. Um,
Yeah.
or I'm trying to think of other explanations I've heard, but there's a simple explanation, and that's that everything points to. It's that they're not in very good shape. So you have to ask yourself, which is more likely, this sort of weird roundabout explanation that has to misinterpret our understanding of physiology and biomechanics, or that this person with overweight or obesity who has this overexpression of these type X muscle fibers, which we'll get into more in our next episode, is just not in the kind of condition they should be in.
I mean, it's one
What
of
do you
these
think?
things where you and I have spoken about this, and this for me, the heavier weight divisions are there just to accommodate athletes who are taller. That's the way I've kind of looked at it. Have had thoughts on this, but ideally you want these athletes who I always think there's a few professional boxers that I can think of that are super heavyweights. There's other sports, but fighters in particular because they have these sports, but or rather weight divisions. But they're like 6'5", 6'6", and they're absolutely they're just all muscles. They're not really carrying much fat on them, and they're fighting other boxers in that division who are carrying a lot more fat on them who are shorter, with the exception being like Mike Tyson in when he was like in his prime. Um, but again, you want to talk about somebody who was sort of a freakish athlete as well with no body fat. It was like Mike Tyson, whose like arms were protecting his face because his biceps were big enough to do that, and his speed. But
I have that problem too.
yeah, we all do. It's part of our podcast.
Yeah,
That's
no.
why we're sitting here. Yeah.
Sometimes
But
when I'm
yeah, I
washing
always
my hair, I get
yeah
stuck. Like
yeah.
like I get a pump from like yeah. Go on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I have to just use a special scrub brush because my arms are just so huge. Um,
Just keep your arms down
but
here and you use the brush.
yeah, yeah.
I
I
like it.
have a I have a Brillo pad on my shower that's attached there. It's just velcroed on, and I just
It's
scrub myself against it. Um,
like a scratching
but
post.
yeah, yeah, like exactly. And so for me, it always was this idea of just accommodating taller athletes who are uh, I always think of you think of a prototype athlete at whatever weight division, it's just the same kind of physique, but just getting taller and longer.
Like scaled up, yeah.
Yeah. That's all I always thought it was for. It wasn't just like, well, I'm gonna get huger
Well, in an idealized world,
horizontally.
that's the case. And I think something before people, because I'm, people like to misinterpret things and get upset, but I don't know that we have sufficient listenership for that to be a major issue for us. But what we're not saying though is that like, oh, or, we're not criticizing people who, with overweight or obesity who are in these weight divisions. Like if this is your entry into sport or you just don't feel like addressing it or whatever, that's fine. What we're speaking to is, particularly coaches, and commentators and even some athletes who sort of justify gaining weight with this idea that it will always improve performance. Because I've heard of a lot of coaches that encourage their athletes to just keep gaining weight. And like, not only do I not think it's the best approach from, performance perspective, like I don't actually think it works. But I think you do have some, if you're going to give this advice, you have a responsibility to your athlete to say, okay, also, by the way, this could have significant long term negative health impacts. And a lot of super heavyweight athletes, as well as linemen and throwers, post career have a lot of trouble, have a lot of difficulty losing that weight and, really high incidence of diabetes and osteoarthritis. Like, so if you're going to pitch that as a coach, like if you're going to toe this line where you're saying, yeah, bigger's better and stronger, you should also be saying, oh, yeah, by the way, probably going to struggle with your weight after the fact. It's bad for your health and you're risking, vascular disease as you age. And I've
I
never heard
honestly,
that.
I would argue even if they did that, the athletes still would only hear the first part. Like, I know I would have
Yeah, maybe.
if at that age, I would have been like, whatever. That's like a problem 20 years down the line. I wanna get as big and strong as possible, whatever it takes.
Yeah, but I mean, if it was couched in the context of like, it also might not, it probably isn't going to work after, you hit like
Then
25,
then that's
30%
different.
body fat. Also, if every coach said it, right? Like, not that one coach who's like, I have your interest at heart instead of some fantasy about, what I think football's supposed to be, or like finding that one kid who's going to make me famous. But all your coaches were like, okay, like if you get bigger, yeah, initially you're going to get stronger, but long term, it's probably not going to make much difference. Also, like your health, and the girls are not going to love it. So, like, that might have
Yeah.
changed your perception
Yeah.
a
Oh,
little bit.
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
I will push back and say that with throwers, that doesn't seem to be as much of the case. I know there's a lot of bigger throwers, but that kind of
What doesn't
culture
be the
doesn't.
case? Oh, culture. Yeah.
The sort of culture around like getting bigger is better. In some cases, I
Good.
remember being discouraged from it. Yeah, it didn't in throws. We just, especially in hammer throw, you just get such a wide range of body types. Um, like and I know with shot put too, like you see everyone at discus, they're usually the athletes are pretty jacked and tall. Shot put I know is the one where you can get that range of body types that are a bit broader and carry more adiposity with them. For the most part, it doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be any like overt messaging like it is in football that I've experienced, at least personally and anecdotally.
Yeah.
I can't say whether that exists everywhere with all like countries where they do throws.
I mean, the only place, I'll be honest, I've ever seen it is in shot put, and I think that, I mean,
Yeah.
javelin, obviously you don't
Yeah,
see
you
it,
gotta run.
and in hammer and discus, like they have to move quickly. Yeah, exactly, and even javelin and discus, like it's, or sorry, discus and hammer, you so obviously need to be fast, and you
Yeah.
you have to move quickly in shot put too, but it's not as dynamic, right? And I think that's probably part of it. Like
Mhm.
it's tougher to make that argument when you're, yeah, you've got a 35% body fat and you're trying to spin around with a hammer. Uh, it gets obvious pretty quickly that that's not ideal.
And it's funny because I think sometimes people conflate seeing these athletes who are carrying a little bit of extra weight, but still tons of muscle with like, oh, well, I just need to gain tons of weight and I don't have to worry about being lean. Like I'm thinking of the Ryan Krauser, he's the current world record holder in shot put. And like, yeah, he's carrying a little extra weight, but like he's also super muscular and like 6'8" or something.
Yeah,
He's a behemoth.
no, for sure. And again, I mean, you're right that it's definitely less in throwers. Um, Football, I think, is probably among the, and I'll call out powerlifting, although I think the culture around that's starting to change a bit. Um, just as I think, people get better informed and it gets more competitive. Um, but they're, I think, among the more guilty of it. And you see it in weightlifting too, where you have some very big athletes who's honestly like, especially with juniors, I see it, and I worry about these kids' health, and it's, you know, I'm glad they're doing stuff, and that's like we said at the beginning, so that the fit fat paradigm, it's like 100% they should be. I'm glad they're engaged in these sports and to be active. But I wonder if anyone said to them like, you should be concerned about your health because I mean, especially in something like Olympic weightlifting, like you're not going to get like a multi-year, multi-million dollar contract. Like at best, you'll go to the Olympics, maybe get like a small sponsorship here or there, but like your health is, I know I sound like an old man, but because in the end, it's pretty big deal, right? Like, um, all right. So I think in short, we can sort of capture that and like this idea that more mass is better, even from a performance perspective. Requires ignoring a pretty long list of evidence and things that we know about tissue mechanics and biomechanics and how force is generated by your body, without even getting into whatever the hell people are talking about with a giant belly helping with intra-abdominal pressure, which I mean, if it is like that, that's a lot of that's
Why don't you just
with
wear a
if you're getting
weightlifting
enough
belt?
intra-abdominal. Yeah, exactly. You put on a belt and there your inter-abdominal pressure is up again for the appropriate, 30 seconds.
Without
But
the
yeah, if you're
diabetes.
generating
Yeah, yeah,
enough without the diabetes, that's a
yeah,
different belt.
yeah.
But yeah, if you're able to get, if your belly's big enough that is like increasing inter-abdominal pressure enough that it's improving your lifting, like you are not long for this world.
No,
Like you're making some hard decisions here.
yeah, you're on borrowed time, statistically.
Yeah, no kidding.
I wonder though, like even with
Yeah.
more aggressive weight loss, if improvements in things like sleep quality might offset some of the performance deficit you might see with rapid weight loss. Because I know that's always a fear. It's like if I lose all this weight, I'll lose all the strength. But then I think about things like sleep apnea that are, they're intricately related to having overweight or obesity. If that
Well, in
if that
recovery,
would be
right?
offset by, yeah, absolutely. You can breathe better at night. I think it would definitely improve your recovery. And again, I think with the
Well,
rapid weight loss, this might have been a harder question to ask in the past since it's never been an easy task, and there's always going to be some sort of performance detriments while you do it because it sucks. It's hard, and it's hard to like keep up and sustain training volume when you're trying to lose weight too. Um, and even in a research setting, that's the case. But now with GLP-1 agonists, it could be easier than ever to investigate this. You could design a study where athletes undertake an intervention that's supported by these GLP-1s, and sleep quality metrics could be measured to see if they improve. You look at it like another group that can stay the same weight with the help of PAP machines to help with sleep. If we're looking at sleep in particular, then have a control group who stays the same weight and with and without PAPs.
yeah. So like look into, yeah. So people are, like you said, like they're concerned about losing weight and that negatively affecting performance. But then you say, okay, well, what's your performance loss associated with, poor recovery because you sleep like hell because you have sleep apnea, because you have a 30-inch neck, like obstructive sleep apnea because of overweight or obesity. So if we remove that, like, does that more than offset? Like, is that part of this, general observation that, big athletes can't recover or handle the same training load as well? Like, are they all in addition to having some of the physiological differences in their muscle tissue also just chronically underslept,
Yeah, the
Um,
the 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 capillarization, issues that you were speaking about earlier with regards to the muscle tissue compounded with the lack of oxygen that you're getting in your sleep, like, this could definitely have detriments to your improvement. Like, if anything, the way I look at it is that you're making these gains because of your mass is allowing you to make these gains in spite of the fact that you're, in spite of rather than because of. I'm not explaining that well, but it's just that you're not getting. you're not maximizing or optimizing, as we say, performance if you're just looking at taking the
Kinda
route of just gaining
everything's
mass.
gotta optimize or maxing. Is it
Yeah,
maxing's like the term? I'm
maxing.
gonna
Yeah,
sleep
it's like
max, sleep maxing.
looks max. Yeah, I'm gonna hydrate max right now.
Excellent. Pap maxing, that's when you get
Pap
those
map. Oh, that sounds so
I don't
weird.
know. Yeah,
That
I
sounds
don't know, it's like
yeah,
getting lots of pap smears, I don't know.
yeah.
Um, it's like a gynecologist trying to hit a quota, so I got a pap max, man. I'm, like, way
Yeah, I got a
behind
Pat
on
Max this month,
my
man.
appointment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm never gonna have a
I'd love to
weekend,
chat.
with my family if I don't pap max. Yeah.
Uh,
Uh, yeah. Alright,
Apologies to
so
my good friend who's
what
a
about
gynecologist.
I can't take a pap joke, then
Yeah.
I don't know. You're just I
You're
mean,
not long
surely
for
as
the
a
profession.
gynecologist, you've yeah, no, you're not gonna last in gynecology if you can't take a few jokes. Um, alright, so for non-athletes then, um, like we talked about how, like why this is an issue for athletes, and that's this idea that, being just ever bigger doesn't mean ever stronger, ever higher performance. And then so I don't think that's generally the goal with your typical fitness enthusiast. Instead, I think sometimes people sort of, or I know for sure. I've heard people say this, like, but as long as I'm active, it doesn't, I can be fit and fat. It doesn't matter if I have this, excess adipose tissue. And I'm not talking about people who don't have six packs. I'm talking about people who would, register as, overweight or obese on a BMI,
Mhm.
but, they also have, some decent muscle tone, maybe, more muscular than average, but they're definitely not sort of in a healthy range. Like, what say you on that?
Um, I mean, it it's funny. So in general, health and fitness is the goal, then I think there's space for being, more aggressive on weight loss, body composition front. Uh, since there isn't a specific performance goal, the health benefits associated with fat loss can't really be priority number 1. And the nutritional approach here doesn't really change, so it's more of a matter of a degree than approach to non-athletes.
Right. So they did, like, if I'm hearing right, like just emphasizing the weight loss. Like, I get, like you touched on it before, like if you're dropping significant weight, especially quickly, like it's gonna hurt performance potentially, at least in the short term while you get accustomed to it. But if you don't have to, you know, practice your whatever sport it is you're doing, um, and you lose weight more aggressively, at least you're getting healthier. And if it hurts your performance, that doesn't really matter in the short term.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Short term, that's exactly it. It is totally short term, and that's something that really needs to be emphasized is that it might suck like, oh, your squat goes down because you're walking daily and moving upstairs with less body weight, so your legs aren't getting as much volume, but over time, your squat will come back up with the added bonus that you're also not going to have the metabolic risk factors and issues associated with having the excess adipose tissue in your body.
Yeah, for sure. And as you don't have this huge calorie deficit after a while, you just feel better, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
you're no
exactly.
longer in that, you're no longer short on caloric energy. All right.
Mhm.
So what do you do then, I guess? And I think, you and I are both on the same page here, with respect to, for athletes, bigger isn't always better, right? Like, just gaining weight, gaining an extra 5-10 kilos of fat in the service of trying to gain, at last 1 kilo of muscle mass, is probably a fool's errand. Likewise, I think for general health and fitness folks who have, normal blood pressure and the like. So, this group that is described in the literature as the fit fat, like there's no obvious, current health issues associated with their weight. It's still a good idea to bring, body fat down to sort of more long-term health supporting level. Um, and so I guess what to do from here depends a little bit on your goal. And you just touched on that. So, we keep saying this throughout the podcast, like in other episodes, what is your goal? Right? Like what are you trying to do? And how far are you from it? Like I don't know. Why don't you take a crack at the sort of the hypothetical fit fat person who's just interested in health and fitness? How do they sort of approach this problem of like, all right, I gotta like just again, we can get into more detail on this next episode, but just they're like, they come to you, they're like, hey, like, I'm pretty fit, I'm in okay shape. I'd like to be leaner because, I understand that there's these long term health implications, or maybe it's vanity. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What would you, how would you start with that?
Yeah, so I mean, the nice thing is like it's always encouraging. Like if I get clients like that, then I know that the one thing I'll emphasize is like I know you're able to take more training volume, or you're willing to take more training volume at least. So it's a good starting point. So again, for fitness, it's the first thing is the priority is to just drop weight. For most people, the main goal here should be to just emphasize fat loss. And this is where the health benefits are going to come from. And since there's no specific performance goal to balance, just getting those fat levels down. So the question is, how quickly should this happen? And there is mixed thinking around this. Some evidence suggests that faster weight loss leads to better adherence. Um, I don't know if this is because people feel encouraged or some other effect. I also don't find the research or this type of research very compelling. There's a lot of confounding variables. Like for example, if you have everything in order, I have a hard time believing that small things like rate of weight loss make a huge difference to adherence. Incidentally, you'll likely find that some performance metrics improve as you lose weight anyways. So relative strength and endurance are very likely to improve in the medium term. And even doing little things like I always try and program things like chin ups in my in my training and in clients training. That will very likely improve if you're strength training and working
Oh
on,
yeah.
and you get it lighter. It's just going to improve, and that's super encouraging because I it's such a classic benchmark of upper body strength. Um, but again, if GLP-1s have taught us anything, it's that most people can lose weight pretty quickly with basically no downside other than not having pants that fit anymore, which does kind of suck. And I've been there. Um, in short, it's safe within reason. And again, if you're on GLP-1s, the other factor is that you're also likely getting some kind of oversight from a physician.
Yeah. I like your chin up or pull up example. Likewise with dips, right? Like nothing tells you you've got dead weight like those exercises. And yeah, even if you don't get any stronger, if you drop like 5, 10% of your body weight, assuming you're able to do a pull up in the first place, they become noticeably easier. Like just,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's really, because they really
Like
do
even a few
punish
pounds,
having,
I
it's like
find
rollout.
yeah, I just find with like even a couple of pounds, like I lose like 2, 3 pounds, and then all of a sudden my chin ups do feel easier, and at the very least, my elbows stop hurting as much when I do them, so it's nice.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've always found that like the relation, like how much, well, even if, back when I had sort of a thicker legs when I was competing Olympic weightlifting, that didn't help my pull-ups any. And, just being overall lighter now, pull-ups are easier for sure. All right. So that's for your average person who just like wants to be healthy, not have a stroke, and, maybe look good at the beach. So for people with more performance related goals, like say if you're an athlete or just you have performance related goals, right? Like some people just like being strong or like having some a particular endurance target, whether or not they ever compete, right? Like it's just, like pull-ups. You like doing pull-ups. I want to be able to do X number of pull-ups. I think there's a bigger argument here for slower rate of weight loss. But I mean, I think the weight loss, and this is typical, and this typically happens anyway. It has sort of a like an exponential decay, right? So you decide tomorrow, all right, I'm going to lose some weight. My body fat percentage is too high. Let's say it's like 30%, 35%. You start with a, calorie deficit, and, you start losing weight pretty quickly. And that's pretty common. And the more weight you lose, the slower it comes off. And that's this sort of decay where you've got this fast drop and then this nice slow sort of like asymptotic taper where it takes,
No fancy graphs
longer and
today?
longer to lose the same amount of weight. Um, And I think that's typically how weight loss happens. But even that initial drop should be maybe a little more conservative if you do have, especially a short term performance goal. If you've got a longer timeline, like you're like, okay, I need to get my weight down. I got like 6 months, 12 months to do it. Maybe take a bit of a hit at the beginning. And like you just said, you do get used to it, right? Like your body adjusts. It's like, okay, we've got to be a little more frugal with how we spend our energy, which is part of why it comes off more slowly. But you get used to the deficit. You don't feel so, tired from it after a little while. Um, and yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. I was going to get into a little bit like that idea of like why there is this like decay or this like slowing of weight loss. And there's a few reasons, but I think actually it's getting late. We'll just pick up on that next time.
Will
Um,
you have, some nice fancy graphs for us?
I'm gonna try to have some nice fancy graphs. Yeah, I think I don't know if people
Forward
like
to
them.
it.
I thought they were kind of cool. I enjoyed doing them. That's something.
I wanna see another
Um,
heat map
all right,
graph.
so
I love it when you pull those out.
it's all heat maps all the time, all
Yeah, all
probabilistic
the time.
and stochastic. Yeah. Mm. All right. So I think the final thing to touch on is this idea of recomposition. It's getting a lot of traction right now, and so this is this idea that you can simultaneously, gain muscle while losing fat. It's like absolutely happens, and it's you know easier the less lean you are. So the people that we're talking about, or the context that we're talking about today, I think it's especially relevant. And that's that. And this is, I think, even more prescient because the idea that, GLP-1s cause excess loss of lean tissue, which I don't believe to be true. And we discussed that in our previous episode on GLP-1s and wrote an article about it. And we called it early. It's not going to be an issue. And more recent research is now starting to support that. But anyway, this idea of recomposition. So this is, the idea that in a calorie deficit, you can gain muscle while losing fat. And, back in even the early 2000s, and I don't know when it started to shift, like people really arguing about this, even in the literature. And I think it's sort of hard to believe now how much, people, even like scientists, researchers pushed back on this idea. And a lot of it, as I alluded to earlier in this episode, is based on, I don't know, almost like half-assed attempts at invoking physics or biophysics to justify a position that
So
like
confusing. It was
it
like
really
you
doesn't.
lose a pound of fat, it's like 3,000 calories, but gain muscle, it's like 2,000 calories. Like, well, which one is it, and which direction are we going? Like, it was a lot. It's like if your body hits 2,000 extra calories a week, then it'll gain muscle. But if you go over that, it's going to be fat. Like, there was no really strong explanation for it. Like, it made sense on paper, just because of the amount of calories it takes to do
Kinda?
these things. Kind of, but at the same time, it wasn't like you should be able to do them simultaneously. And we saw this happen in the gym with people, particularly with beginners. So the explanation was kind of out the window
Well,
where you
yeah.
could only do one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I'll claim to have never bought it, right? Like, everyone always does this. They look back and like, "Well, I knew that the whole time." And like, there were definitely a laundry list of things that I thought that turned out to be nonsense. Um, this wasn't one of them. And I think I like the analogy for this one because everyone says, oh, or well, they used to say, oh, well, they give some thermodynamic explanation. It's like, well, you're in a calorie deficit, you can't gain muscle. And it's like, well, no, you're in a global deficit, but locally you can still have a surplus. So
Yeah.
by this, I mean, by way of analogy, let's say you have a factory, right? And the factory makes muscles, right? It's got an energy supply. Let's just, it's got fuel. It doesn't matter what it uses for fuel. And it uses this fuel to turn, you know, food into muscles. Let's say some asshat imposes tariffs on wherever this factory is. You know, we can all relate to that these days because of some,
Just
So
had
actually,
imposing
I thought
tariffs.
of as an aside, yeah.
Yeah.
As an aside, I wonder if, in the US, they're tariffing everyone. If they learned that tariff comes from Arabic, like the term comes from Arabic, if they would be so pro tariff. And I suspect, given the current administration, that they would not, in fact, like to know that tariff is originally an Arabic word.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, well, anyway, there you go. Every day's a school day. All right. So our
Every day.
factory, right? Someone imposes tariffs. And now all of a sudden, there's not as much, there's a lower availability of fuel for the factory. Luckily, this factory has a bit of a stockpile of fuel, which, for those not following the analogy, is your big fat belly. Not you specifically, my big fat belly, say. So, factory, trying to make muscle. Turns out someone's turned off or turned down the energy supply for the factory, the fuel supply, but it still wants to make muscle. Turns out there's this big surplus in one of the back of the warehouse. Factory manager says, all right, we're good. I don't think this tariff business is going to last too long. Surely someone's going to see the light of day, realize this is like backward economic policy, and they're going to they're going to fix things. This is stupid. Only an imbecile would do this. So the factory just keeps making
What are we
muscle, right?
talking
It
about now?
doesn't
Sorry.
have. We're talking about, this is physiology. What are you talking about?
Okay,
So
cool. Cool.
all right. So the factory can keep making muscle because it's got plenty of fuel, right? It's got all it needs. It's got substrate. It's got the energy to do it. Turns out tariffs go on a little longer than we'd hoped. We're starting to eat into our reserves a little bit. Again, for those not following the analogy, you're starting to get pretty lean. The factory manager, that's homeostasis, steps in. It's like, all right, okay, we're getting low on our reserves. The fuel coming in, it's still pretty choked off here. We're going to start making less muscle. So what we're saying is, if you're really lean, yeah, recomposition's probably not going to work great. It's going to be really tough to do. And at some point, it becomes impossible, and you end up losing muscle if your calorie deficit is deep enough for long enough. If you're carrying significant excess adipose tissue, like recomposition, that is gaining muscle while losing fat, you can do that in a pinch. This is not an issue. It
Yeah,
is like, don't even worry about it. It'll happen without you even noticing if you're making a significant, increase in your training volume or something. Just don't worry. It'll happen. All right. So yeah, analogies aside, the research and our vast experience and so many other people's experience support this idea of recomposition. That's, I think, is sort of one piece that'll help assuage people's concerns, especially, the athletic types who are like, oh, I don't want to lose my gains, even though I'm, risking my health long term. You don't need to
for
keep
sure.
getting heavier. Bigger is not always better. All right. So, from the nutrition standpoint, anything you want to add about sort of how to approach this?
Yeah, I mean, it's things we've touched on before. Bring calories down is a big one. This is a whole other episode. Substituting for low density, high fiber foods is a good place to start. It's always a good place to start. Fiber's always great. Everyone always needs more fiber in their diet. It's one of my go-to recommendations. Protein requirements. You
Fiber
decrease protein
Max.
as yeah. Holy shit.
Sorry.
Come on. So protein requirements decrease as a proportion of caloric content as body fat proportion increases. Um, and again, if you're looking to lose weight, and the interesting thing with body recomposition is there is encouragement to increase protein intake. Does it have to be crazy levels, like we saw in that one paper? The name of the lead author escapes me, but it was in Stuart Phillips' lab. I don't think so, but it was
That's they did like
it was
four
like two.
grams of or
It wasn't
three
that. I
grams
was
of protein per
sorry. I
kilo.
just
Did
three.
you? Oh
It
my god,
was
where'd you go?
no, my chair just went kaput. No, it was. I got very excited about protein. No, it was. I think it was 2.4 grams per kilogram, from what I recall, and it was 3 grams of carbohydrates. So it's 2.4
Okay.
grams per kilogram, or 2.4 to 2.6. Like it was pretty high, obviously, because it's per kilo. Um, but they were in a caloric deficit, and that paper for me was great because it justified all of the stuff we were talking about in the early aughts. Um, that like these individuals were all losing body fat and gaining muscle at the same time, and they gained strength. You know, and I looked at their program too, and it wasn't like a super complicated resistance training program. There's interval training and all this stuff. Anyways,
No secret
um,
Soviet.
no peaking procedure
uh,
from 1980s Muscle and Fitness magazine that I still have a copy of somewhere.
Excellent.
So that being said, if you have like 30% body fat, you don't need to be eating 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. You don't need all this extra protein to sustain the fat because protein is calories. So that's something important to remember. Um, Without having to do any of the math, you should be able to see that as you get leaner, the ratio of protein to body mass gets closer to the number that's often recommended, around 1.6 grams per kilo. This goes without changing protein intake too. Protein's also spared more when you have a high body fat percentage. Again, like Alex was talking about with his wicked factory, uh, his factory analogy, and or tariffs. I'm not really sure. There's like an economics lesson there in there too. It was great. So if you have body fat to spare, you're less likely to pull energy from muscle. This does start to get to change as you get lean, but again, it's another episode. And again, I'm excited to see how you mix that with economics. And with carbs, I think we're really we should be past the peak anti-carb sentiment, which was a weird thing that we went through. It happened after the wave of anti-fat sentiment. Um, and I still think there's some anti-carb sentiment out there, so it's important to talk about. But yeah, carbs are fine. Just the carbs that we usually have problems with are ones that are um, they're ones that also have a bunch of fat or salts and sugars connected to them. Think a donut. Those aren't the best carbs
Yeah.
for losing weight. Delicious, but not great for losing weight.
I'm anti mayonnaise. That's like my only.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I don't have an issue with mayo. I don't eat a lot of it or anything, but I just, I grew up with mayo in my life because of being from the Ukraine. They call a salad they call this thing a salad where you just put potatoes and mayonnaise together with like peas and it's called a
it's
salad. It's great.
it's gross. It's gross. I don't want to talk to you anymore. All right, wrap it up.
All right. Um with carbs, just don't drop them really quickly or really low. There's still don't listen to people giving the anti-carb narrative. Ignore it. And I think that's kind of where I want to just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that I think that's good. And we can the next episode will get a little, a little more pragmatic with the advice, a little more detail and some of the mechanistic stuff because it's sort of fun. It's sort of like
Hmm.
our intro episode. All right, so it's getting late. Let's wrap it up. Put this one to bed. So just to recap, so we discussed the so-called fit fat paradox. Again, not our language. I think, you know, we've passed the idea that there's any real paradox here, right? Like it's not a paradox. Instead, it just kind of illustrates that health and fitness gains still occur in someone who isn't lean, right? Lean doesn't equal fit. Similarly, fit doesn't mean you get a free pass for the long term and especially long term negative health effects of excess adiposity. So it's good to be fit, regardless of your body composition, be as fit as you can. That's always the advice, right? That's always what we're going to say. Um, but having an appropriate amount of body fat is also good for your health for whole host of reasons. We also discussed from the perspective of the strength athlete in particular. Bigger isn't always better. Don't always just push to gain more weight, thinking, "Oh, if I'm bigger, I'll be stronger." And for every you know lifter that you point to or whatever you say, "Oh, but they were huge," I'll point to someone like Anatoly Pizarenko and be like, "Yeah, this guy wasn't. It didn't matter." Like it doesn't. Or even like the current world record holder in weightlifting in the super heavyweights for both the snatch and clean and jerk,
Lasha,
Lasha. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I can never say his last name right.
Talladega. Yeah.
Every Yeah, anyone who knows what I'm talking about. I mean, his best lifts weren't at his heaviest. Like and he was never small, but you know,
He's also six
continuing to
foot
get bigger
six, six
didn't make.
seven. Like yeah.
Yeah, he's huge. He's like 6'7". He's so big. But anyway, but yeah, he was definitely carrying too much body fat, and when he went to carry more, lifts didn't go up. Um, yeah, and this approach relies on flawed logic. It relies on ignoring things that we know for sure about physiology, and it puts the athlete at significant health risk, and that's not nothing. And I suspect also opens them up to injuries that they would otherwise be at least partially sort of inoculated against just from having better health and fitness. Yeah, and we also started to discuss a little bit on how to approach this from both a health and fitness enthusiast as well as athletes. Like, what do you do about it if you no longer want to be in this state? And in part two, we're going to get into the weeds on that a little bit more and give some more sort of more detail and mechanisms and more more pragmatic, workable advice. I want to say actionable because it belies my having worked in an office, and I don't want to go
Ugh,
back there. All right.
my trauma.
Yeah. All right. So that's it for us. Have a good night. See everybody. I'm not sure when. Next week I'm going to be on a beach in Curacao, so either we'll skip next week or maybe we'll put out a mini episode to tide you over until part two of this. And until then, take care.